The notification came in at 6:47 in the morning, and I was already awake because I'd been awake since 4, listening to my brother snore through the wall that separated his room from the hallway closet they'd converted into my bedroom 8 months ago. That's what I was sleeping in, a closet, with a cot, a single outlet, and a shelf they'd never bothered to clear, so I was sharing the space with my mother's holiday decorations and 3 broken vacuum cleaners. I want to make sure you understand something before I keep going. I wasn't sleeping in that closet because I had to. I was sleeping in it because I chose to. And I had very specific reasons for that choice. I'll get to those. The notification was from my brokerage account, a dividend deposit, $31,000, hitting quietly like it always did, while the rest of the house was still asleep. I put my phone face down on the cot and stared at the ceiling, which was also a shelf, technically, and thought about what my mother had said at dinner the night before. "You've always been a drain on this family. Even before you were born, you cost us." She'd said it the way people say things they've said so many times they don't even hear themselves anymore, like reciting a grocery list. I was 28 years old. I had a master's degree in financial analytics. I ran a consulting firm I built from nothing over 6 years, and as of that morning, my net worth sat at a little over $4.3 million. Nobody in that house knew any of that, and keeping it that way had been the plan all along. Let me back up. Let me tell you how a person ends up sleeping in a closet on purpose. My parents had me when they were young, and from everything I can piece together, I interrupted something they'd been planning. My father had this whole idea of himself, the self-made businessman, the provider, the man with a vision. My mother had married that vision. Then I arrived, and then my brother arrived 2 years later, and somewhere in there my father's business started struggling, and I became the reason. Not my brother, never my brother. Me. I was 4 years old the first time my father told me I'd ruined his life. I'd broken my arm falling off the backyard fence, and the hospital bills, this was before they had decent insurance, had wiped out a small savings account he'd been building. He sat me down, my arm still in a fresh cast, and explained, very calmly, that I had cost this family $12,000. I was 4. I didn't fully understand money yet, but I understood the tone. That tone followed me for the next 24 years. My brother could do no wrong. He was the natural athlete, the charming one, the one my parents bragged about at church and at neighborhood barbecues. I was the one who always found a way to make things harder. I was the one who took and never gave back. I was the one who, when I got a full scholarship to a university 3 states away, was told by my own mother that I was probably going to fail out within a semester and come crawling home. I didn't fail out. I graduated with honors, got my master's, and started building something. I came back home 4 years ago because my maternal grandmother was sick. She was the one person in my family who had ever, without condition, been in my corner. She called me her quiet storm. She said I reminded her of herself, patient, watchful, and dangerous when pushed. She passed 2 years ago, and I stayed because I was in the middle of a real estate deal that required my address to remain local, and then the deal closed and I started another one, and by then I had realized something important. My family was committing financial fraud, not in a small, confused way, in a deliberate, escalating federal crime way. My father had a small construction business that had been hemorrhaging money for years. My brother had moved back home after his 3rd failed venture, a gym, a food truck, then a lifestyle brand that had lasted 11 months. My mother managed the household accounts and had, I discovered almost by accident, been using my social security number to open store credit cards since I was 19. I found out about the credit cards when I was running a routine personal credit check before refinancing. 4 accounts. Over $22,000 in combined balances. My name. My social. Her purchases. Furniture, clothing, a treadmill, 2 vacations. I didn't confront her. I documented everything. That was the beginning. I hired a forensic accountant I trusted, a woman I'd worked with on 2 commercial deals, and I asked her to help me build a picture. What she found over the next 3 months was worse than I'd expected. My father had listed me as a co-borrower on a business loan without my knowledge or consent, claiming I had an annual income of $180,000 from a salaried position I had never held. The loan was for $250,000. He'd used it to pay off the business's existing debts and fund my brother's lifestyle brand. The lifestyle brand had failed. The loan was still outstanding, and my name was on it. I had enough to destroy them legally without ever stepping foot back in that house. I could have handed everything to an attorney and watched from a distance. But I wanted something more than legal victory. I wanted them to understand in a way they could not misinterpret or reframe or minimize exactly who they had underestimated. So I stayed, and I waited, and I kept sleeping in that closet. The thing about people who have spent years dismissing you is that they stop being careful around you. They stop editing themselves. They say the quiet part loud because they genuinely don't believe you're paying attention, or that it would matter if you were. My father, at the dinner table 3 months after I'd moved back, I don't know why we're still carrying her. She's almost 30, and what does she have to show for it? My brother laughing, she's always been the liability, Dad. That's just facts. My mother, refilling her water glass, I told you that years ago. I ate my chicken and nodded once and went back to my closet and opened my laptop and reviewed the term sheet for a 6-unit apartment complex I was under contract to purchase. The address was 4 blocks from my parents' house. The purchase price was $1.1 million. I was buying it in cash. The eviction conversation happened on a Tuesday in March. I came home from a coffee meeting to find my mother and brother in the kitchen with an expression I recognized, the slightly too casual posture of people who had rehearsed something. My mother said she needed to talk to me about the room situation. I said okay. She said that my brother's girlfriend was moving in and they needed the spare room. She called it the spare room, as though I had not been living in it, and that it was time for me to think about next steps. My brother's girlfriend was 22 and had never had a job that lasted longer than 4 months, which I knew because my brother had complained about it for 6 months before apparently deciding this was fine. They had been dating for 7 months. I said, "So you're asking me to move out?" My mother said, "We're asking you to start being a grown adult, which you should have done years ago." My father appeared in the doorway. He had clearly been waiting nearby. "You've had a free ride here long enough," he said. "It's time to go live your own life." My brother didn't say anything. He was looking at his phone. I looked at the three of them for a moment. My mother with her arms crossed. My father with that tone, the calm, lecture-giving tone he'd used since I was 4 years old, with a broken arm. My brother, unbothered, already somewhere else in his mind. I said, "Okay, I'll be out by the end of the week." My mother blinked. She had expected more resistance. They always expected more resistance, and when they didn't get it, they didn't know what to do with themselves. "Good," my father said, but it landed flat. I went to my closet, sat down on the cot, and sent a text to my real estate attorney. "Ready to move on the Carlisle property. Let's close by Friday." The Carlisle property was a 4-bedroom colonial on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood my parents had always said was out of reach for people like us. I had been under contract on it for 60 days, waiting for the right moment to close. The right moment had apparently just arrived. I moved out on Thursday. I loaded my car with 2 bags. Everything that actually mattered to me fit in 2 bags, because I had never brought my real life into that house. And I drove to the Carlisle house, where my attorney handed me the keys on the front porch. I stood in the empty living room for a while. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a backyard with 2 mature oak trees, the kind of place my grandmother would have loved. I called her name out loud in that empty room, just once. Then I got to work. Here's where I have to tell you about the other thing I'd found during my 3 months of documentation. Beyond the credit cards, beyond the fraudulent loan application, there was a third layer. My father, desperate to save his construction business, had been running a sideline operation. He was submitting inflated invoices to a local nonprofit, a community development organization that received federal grant money, for work that was either partially completed or not completed at all. The invoices were in the range of $8,000 to $15,000 each. There were 11 of them over 18 months. This was not a gray area. This was federal grant fraud. My forensic accountant had flagged it. I had confirmed it with a second set of eyes. A former federal prosecutor I paid for 2 hours of consultation, she used the word straightforward twice in the same sentence. I had been sitting on this for 60 days, letting it age, making sure my documentation was complete and airtight. The day I moved into the Carlisle house, I also mailed a package, certified return receipt, to the Inspector General's office for the federal agency that funded the nonprofit. 2 weeks after I moved out, my brother texted me. The text said, "Mom and Dad are asking about rent. They said since you're gone, they need help covering things. Can you pitch in?" I read it twice. I responded, "I don't think that's something I can help with." He said, "You're so selfish. You always have been." I put my phone on my kitchen counter in my house, and made myself a cup of coffee and watched the oak trees in the backyard move in the wind. Selfish. The word they had always reached for when I didn't give them what they wanted. I was okay with it. The investigation opened 6 weeks later. I know this because my father called me, and it was the first time he had voluntarily called me in 4 years. His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Something pressed in, like paper held up to a light. He said there were federal investigators looking into his business. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said he needed, and he actually used this word, the word I had never once heard him direct at me, help. I said, "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope it works out for you." He said, "You don't understand. This could affect all of us." I said, "I understand more than you think." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I hope you have a good attorney." I hung up. I sat with that for a while. There was no satisfaction that felt like victory, not exactly. It was more like the particular quiet that comes after a storm that you've been watching build on the horizon for a very long time. The pressure finally releasing, the air finally clearing. But I want to tell you about the other thing. The thing I had built quietly while I was still sleeping in that closet. I had started making strategic investments in my parents' neighborhood 8 months before I moved back in. I'd bought 2 rental properties on the same block through a holding company I'd established 3 years earlier. The holding company was named Harlow Capital Group, a name that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't looked it up, and no one had looked it up. My parents' house was not one of those properties, but the house 2 doors down from theirs was. And the apartment complex 4 blocks away that I'd purchased in cash the week I moved out, that one had 6 units. 4 of them were already occupied, 2 were vacant. When my parents discovered, 4 months after I moved out, that the property management company handling their own rental, a house they owned outright and rented to a tenant for extra income, had been absorbed into a portfolio managed by Harlow Capital Group, they called the property management company to complain. The property management company told them that Harlow Capital Group had purchased the management contracts for 12 properties in the area as part of a consolidation, and that all inquiries should be directed to the principal of Harlow Capital Group. My mother called the number. I answered. She said, "Who is this?" I said, "It's me, Mom." The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever shared with another human being. "What?" she finally said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound a person makes when the architecture of everything they believed suddenly shifts. I said, "Harlow Capital Group is mine. I'm your property manager now. You'll want to make sure your lease renewal is in order. I'll be sending updated terms next month." She hung up. My father called back 40 minutes later. He was not using the thin paper voice this time. He was using the other voice, the loud one, the one from my childhood, the one that was supposed to make me feel small. He said I had manipulated them. He said I had been planning this. He said I had deceived my own family. I let him go for a little while. Then I said, You listed me as a co-borrower on a federal loan application without my consent. You forged my signature and inflated my income to secure a loan you never intended to fully repay. Mom opened 4 credit accounts in my name and charged over $22,000 without telling me. I've had a forensic accountant and a former federal prosecutor review all of it. Everything I found, I documented. And some of it, not by me, but by me sending information to the right people, is now being looked at by people whose job it is to look at exactly that kind of thing. He was quiet. I said, I didn't manipulate anyone, Dad. I just paid attention, which is something this family never thought I was capable of. Here's what happened in the months that followed. My father's construction business was investigated. The invoice fraud with the nonprofit was confirmed. He received a civil penalty and was required to repay the full amount of the fraudulent invoices with interest, just over $120,000, and was barred from applying for federal contracts for 7 years. Criminal charges were considered and ultimately not filed, which was not a decision I influenced in either direction. I had provided documentation. What happened after that was not mine to control. The fraudulent loan application with my name on it was flagged during a separate bank audit that the investigation triggered. The loan was called in. My father had to liquidate most of his remaining business assets to cover it. My mother received a letter from a collections attorney regarding the 4 credit card accounts. I had already placed a fraud alert on my credit file and begun the dispute process. The accounts were eventually discharged as fraudulent. My credit was restored. My mother was not charged criminally, but the collections matter remained her problem. My brother moved out of my parents' house 6 months after I did, when his girlfriend decided she didn't want to live with his parents after all, which surprised no one except my brother. The last I heard, he was trying to launch something in the wellness content space. I genuinely hope it works out for him, not because he ever treated me well, he didn't, but because I don't carry that weight anymore. I updated the lease terms for my parents' rental property management. My management fee was fair, below market actually. I could have been punitive and chose not to be. That was important to me. What I wanted was not to hurt them. What I wanted was for them to know the truth of who I was. That part was done. I'm writing this from the back porch of the Carlisle house. The oaks are losing their leaves. There's a mug of coffee going cold on the table next to me because I keep stopping to think. My grandmother used to say that the people who underestimate you are actually doing you a favor. They show you who they are. They show you what they're capable of. And they hand you the element of surprise like a gift, wrapped up and waiting. She was right. She was almost always right. I think about what I would tell a younger version of myself. The 4-year-old with the broken arm, sitting across from a father who was explaining, with extraordinary calm, what she had cost him. I would tell her that she was going to be fine. More than fine. I would tell her that one day she was going to sit on a porch she owns outright, in a neighborhood he always said was out of reach, watching oak trees move in the October wind, and the only thing she'd feel is quiet. Not happy in a loud way, not vindicated in a way that needs an audience. Just quiet and free and fully, entirely herself. That's enough. That has always been enough. I keep coming back to that image of my father sitting across from a 4-year-old with a broken arm, explaining calmly what she had cost him. I've thought about it hundreds of times over the years, not with anger anymore, but with something closer to clarity. Because that moment, as cruel as it was, taught me something that no classroom ever did. It taught me that the world will not always be fair to you, and the people who are supposed to protect you will not always choose to. What you do with that knowledge is entirely up to you. I chose to pay attention. That's the thing nobody talks about when they tell stories like mine. They focus on the ending, the property, the phone call, the moment the power shifted. But the ending was just arithmetic. It was the result of years of quiet, deliberate choices that nobody saw, because nobody was looking. My family stopped watching me a long time ago. They decided early on what I was worth, and once you decided that about a person, you stop updating your assessment. You stop noticing what they're building. That's not just their failure. That's a pattern I've watched repeat in almost every story I know about people who got overlooked and then stopped being overlookable. The ones who made it weren't always the loudest or the most naturally gifted. They were the ones who kept their integrity intact when it would have been easier to let it slip, who didn't steal back, didn't lie, didn't become the version of themselves that their worst treatment was trying to create. My mother used my identity to open credit accounts. I could have done something equally dishonest in return. I didn't. Not because I'm a saint, but because I understood that how you respond to being wronged is the thing that determines what you actually are. The response is the character. I also think about intelligence differently now than I did in my 20s, when I thought it was mostly about being right. What actually got me through was a different kind of smart, the kind that knows when to be quiet, when to document instead of confront, when to build instead of argue. It's the intelligence that asks what is actually happening here instead of how do I win this fight. Those are very different questions with very different outcomes. My father was always trying to win fights. I was trying to understand the whole board. And then there's the part that I honestly think is the hardest. The part that doesn't get romanticized in stories like this. The endurance. Sleeping in a closet when you don't have to. Eating dinner with people who diminish you and not reacting. Holding the long plan when every instinct is telling you to just leave, just be done, just let it go. That kind of staying power doesn't come from anger. Anger burns out. It comes from knowing exactly what you're working toward and deciding that it matters enough to wait for. I'm not telling you this because I think my situation is universal. Not everyone's family commits fraud. Not everyone gets the clean ending. But I do believe that what happened to me and what I was able to do about it came down to those three things working together over a long time. Doing right even when wronged. Thinking clearly instead of reactively. And staying in it long enough for the work to land. The rest was just math.